we've been using the same system for decades, right? Where like students go to school, you've got math and science and reading and all of this, and yet the world of work is changing so rapidly. So it's just not a matter of if, it's when these industries will be affected by technology.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are changing the way that business happens. And I'm super excited. Today we're in Venture Cafe St. Louis. Venture Cafe is the largest weekly gathering of innovators making things happen. And today we're with a good friend, Matt Menietti of Global Hack, and I'm super excited for this show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So Matt is the executive director of Global Hack. He's also been incredibly involved in the startup community here in St. Louis. He served with 2 nationally ranked accelerator programs, Capital Innovators and 630. In 2012, he was one of St. Louis Business Journal's 30 under 30 list of up-and-coming young professionals. He's a former AmeriCorps Vista member. Matt is also a co-founder of an online resource sharing tool for nonprofits called GoodMap, which won $30,000 in seed funding through the Youth Bridge Social Enterprise Competition in 2013. He's also an active triathlete, photographer, and chess instructor. Matt, it is a pleasure to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So I think the first time that we were involved with you was with a Global Hack hackathon.
Yeah.
And that was the big one. Like, that set the precedent for like the ones that would follow, right?
Yeah, so that was in 2016. That was our largest event to date, called Global Hack 6. It was focused around homelessness, like how do we build capacity within that sector, looking at organizations that serve the homeless and kind of targeting the software and systems that they use and trying to figure out, can we bring smart, innovative people together to hack that, to make it better. And it was a fantastic event. Really appreciate you guys getting involved with that. And it turned out super well. It was a ton of work, but it was a lot of fun. We had over 1,000 different technologists that gathered at Chaffetz Arena for a weekend-long hackathon focused around homelessness. It was awesome.
So for someone who doesn't know what a hackathon is, what is entailed in a hackathon? Yeah,
so there's a lot of different styles and varieties of hackathons, but at the end of the day, it's all about accelerating ideas. And so what happens at a hackathon, it's typically a 48-hour event, like a weekend-long event, where you bring together usually technologists. So when I use that term, it's like developers, graphic designers, project managers, anybody that's involved in the creation of software, and they work collaboratively over the course of that weekend to solve a problem. And so typically we present them with a challenge on Friday to say, go build this, and then they come up with a solution and present that demo or that prototype on Sunday. So we provide 24-hour access to the venue, food, activities, just different things to keep them going over that 48-hour period. But you end up seeing these teams produce so much over that weekend, a lot more than probably they would do even like in a week or potentially a month. So you get a lot of quick hits, a lot of shots on goal for different types of solutions, and it's really cool just to see that innovative process come to life at a hackathon.
And I think the most interesting thing is that arena was just packed with people, and packed with all those people you're talking about, developers, designers. So it was just a really interesting experience to be around so many people just focusing all their attention on that one goal.
Yeah. And we had a lot of different, so we had the types of attendees, we pull from, mostly people from St. Louis, but we were able to draw folks from 33 different states, 8 different countries. So it did have kind of this national, international appeal, which is really cool to see people that were passionate about just building software, or passionate about trying to end homelessness by coming to an event in St. Louis. So that was just really neat to see, not just the people that have come to our events time and time again, but some newcomers there as well to come hack with us.
That's awesome. And Global Hack it's a pretty intense thing, but you're also like doing the triathlete thing, which that's like even more intense, I would assume, than like your professional life, right?
A little bit. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm, professional triathlete. There's a lot of money and time that is devoted into that sport. But I was someone that grew up in the pool. I was actually born in San Antonio, Texas, and
Wow.
you can imagine those summers are pretty hot. And I do remember a time where. We would just walk down to the neighborhood pool, and that was basically our entire summer. We'd go, and I got involved. I was in the pool pretty early, so I'm very comfortable in the water. And I thought, it'd be kind of cool to try that on for size. I was a runner in high school, and I try to cycle occasionally. But the 3 disciplines and bringing those all together. But it is an intense sport. It's a lot of fun. It's addicting. I would say that Global Hack offers me, a lot of opportunities and challenges in my work life, and I'm able to, channel that and do some things for fun as well. But I actually have a race coming up in May that I'm training for. It's the half Ironman Chattanooga, so it's going to be my second half. A full is, borderline insanity. I know people that have done a full Ironman, and it takes like a year of planning and training and discipline, and I might get there someday, but it's a crazy race. It's 140. It's a little over 140 miles. It takes most people like 15 hours to complete.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah, that's not on my radar screen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I couldn't even watch TV. You could watch TV for 15 hours and be like, wow, that's a lot of TV I have to watch. Maybe I could do that.
A TV triathlon.
Yeah, exactly. You invent it.
Well,
create it.
So I want to go back to Global Hack, and I just want to go, where did this whole idea for Global Hack start?
So it started with 3 St. Louis entrepreneurs, and Travis Sheridan was one of those people. And so he was one of the co-founders. Travis, Gabe Lozano, who's the CEO and co-founder of a tech startup called Lockerdome, doing really well. And then Drew Winship, who works for a tech startup called Jurstep. Drew's company actually got started at a hackathon. It was one of the first hackathons that I put on called Startup Weekend. Startup Weekend is very similar in format to Global Hack, but instead of a specific problem that we give the teams, people end up crowdsourcing ideas. So on Friday night, it's kind of an open mic night where people say, hey, they have 1 minute to pitch their idea, and then we kind of down select and figure out what are the top 10 to 15 ideas that we want to work on, and then teams form around those ideas. So it's a little bit more open-ended, and the purpose of a Startup Weekend is to really figure out how do you launch a company in 48 hours, which is pretty insane. But for people like Drew, and he was able to get the right mix of people on his team, they really used that event as a catalyst and said, you know what, I think we can actually do this full time. And now, he's opened a new office in San Francisco, and they have a number of employees, and they're making money. It's a really cool story. But anyway, so going back to the why. So Gabe, Travis, and Drew got together with some other community folks and said, this is back in 2012, 2013. How can we improve the St. Louis, tech ecosystem, right? And at that point, there were a lot of business plan competitions going on. There's still a fair amount, and so it was this idea of how do we get more entrepreneurs kind of off the bench and past, hey, I have an idea for something, but I want to turn it into reality, right? This is where the biggest gap that exists for entrepreneurs is kind of like making that leap from I have an idea to I'm going to do something. And so we're like, well, does a business plan really address that gap, right? It basically tests your ability to write really well. I think I can write a pretty damn good business plan, but that's not going to, your business plan will always be wrong, until your product actually hits the market and talk to a customer and figure out okay, well, how do I adjust my pricing and my services? So we said maybe the right approach isn't to incentivize entrepreneurs by saying, hey, if you can write really well, we'll give you $50,000. What if it was actually go out and build shit? What would that look like? And be well, it would probably look like a hackathon. And so that was kind of the impetus at that point, when the organization was founded, to say, if we can get more people in the community to start kind of proactively building stuff and getting them together, maybe we can have a better impact on the St. Louis tech ecosystem. So that was the initial kind of thesis with Global Hack. And so we started to partner with different organizations. We're well, who's going to pay us to run a hackathon? So we would partner with local tech startups. We would partner with corporations and said, hey, we can accelerate your research and development cycle. We can provide you with community of people who are looking for jobs, like developers who are looking for work, this is a win-win for you, right? So we started doing those events, and then eventually kind of landed on this idea of, well, if we're going to put on these hackathons, do we want to continue to run them from like big tech companies? Maybe we can, focus the hackathons in a different area. Maybe the non-for-profit or the civic space. Like that would be, as a non-for-profit ourselves, there's a ton of problems, as you know, both within St. Louis and outside of the region that we can start to attack via hackathon. So that's getting more into like the history, but in terms of how it got started, it was this idea of how do we go beyond like just giving an entrepreneur 25, 50K to like write a good business plan to say, how can we start getting people to actually build some really cool products over the course of a weekend?
That's great. So it's really about execution over ideas.
Yeah, it's all about action.
I love that, because anytime that we've worked in business or creative, the person that wins is the person that actually does something, not the person with the best idea.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it. So have you found that that's kind of have you had a similar drive in other things that you've been involved in, like prior to Global Hack? Do you feel like there's something else in you that drives you to those same like execution over ideas, or did that you come through that through your experience and all your different things you participated in?
I think that's a common thread. I think that, and I would say like where Global Hack is now, we focus less on the entrepreneur. I mean, there's a number of solid organizations like Venture Cafe and the accelerators and the incubators here in town. But I think this idea of, and I do end up talking to like entrepreneurs, just, whether it's grabbing coffee or grabbing drinks or some things like that. And they're like, well, I don't want to tell anybody because someone will steal my idea. And it's like, unless you're coming up with some like biomedical device that's patentable, like no one gives a shit about your idea.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's about the execution. And so I think that's something that we can carry through, not just in service to entrepreneurs, but ultimately like just for the ecosystem in general. But I don't know. I think that, really the value that we have in the community isn't so much like entrepreneur focused, but really about this idea of how can we accelerate innovation within the nonprofit sector, an area that's typically, I guess, averse to change, where you have different organizations or institutions that have been doing things for, the better part of a decade, where they are just trying to think of like, how do we improve service delivery to our clients? Like, how do we use technology to better reach them? So that's one way we add value. I think the other way we add value is really around tech education. So one of the things I didn't mention that Global Hack does is provide accessible computer science opportunities for kids, especially in low-income areas. So when we start thinking about what are the ingredients of any solid tech ecosystem, talent is like, in my mind, like probably usurps capital, right? Like if you don't have the people in place, for software companies, if you don't have people who can like build companies or write code, those are the two main ingredients in my mind. And so I think that we really help those kids be future ready for a society that's ultimately going to be driven by technology in some form or fashion.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times with innovation in the nonprofit space or technology in the nonprofit space, you can see a project go anywhere from like 1 to 5 years or like unending.
Right.
And so what does the world look like, or what does the nonprofit space in St. Louis or even further than that look like when we can take something that usually took years and you do it in a much shorter amount of time, or like in Global Hack's case, a weekend. I know there was more after that weekend, but
yeah. So I think it goes back to like the execution idea too, in terms of like you end up getting in the hackathon a lot of great ideas and concepts that come out of that, right? And one of the things we knew going into, especially the hackathon in 2016, was, listen, we can get pretty far in 48 hours, right? We can have some people build some pretty awesome shit, and solve some really solid problems. But ultimately, so there's this kind of product development phase, but then when we talk about, well, how do we actually get it into the hands of organizations and individuals who are going to use it? So there's this whole kind of testing and implementation phase where like, well, that's just going to take time. It's hard to accelerate that piece. And I think that is intentional. We've learned that you have to be cognizant of relationships and communities and doing things. There's this idea within kind of the civic technology space of building with, not for. And that's something, that's a value that we have when we start thinking about applying technology to these spaces, is that, we can go off and say like, hey, we're going to go to do this hackathon. we're going to solve all your problems and we'll come back with this really cool app and it's going to solve everything, and like not involve those organizations in the process. And they're like, that's not what I asked for. Like, you didn't involve us in the process. You didn't ask our clients like if this is something that they would want to use. So I think this idea of, this kind of tech is this savior that is going to come in and like do all this stuff. It's like, no, technology is basically another tool that the nonprofit sector can use. And I think it's just a matter of like getting them familiar and comfortable with those new tools, and to say like, actually, it may not even be a brand new app that you get. It could just be utilizing existing technology, something that is going to save them time or money down the road. Because I think a lot of leaders in that space are just generally averse to like, well, how is this going to help me? I have limited time. I have limited resources. You need to work with me and try to understand where I'm coming from. And I think just going in with more of a collaborative process in place, rather than just like, we're going to build something and just drop it off and be like, all right, we're here, we're going to move on to the next project. It's really important to see these projects that can be successful. But I think where the hackathon adds a lot of value is kind of in that first product development stage, where you may have people within the sector say, well, that you can never do that. You would need all this money. You need all this time. You're like, well, we'll go out and we'll find the people who will come to this arena or come to this space and actually build it for you. You can at least see the concept, and then after that, we can have a larger conversation about where it goes from there. So I think it's being able to take those, well, that'll never happen, and what if, and all that, and actually get some shots on goal and say, here's some concepts, and let's go from there. That's really where you can accelerate. But I don't, in terms of time to market, I think there's still that critical piece of building relationships and actually taking care of people. There's a human element there that you can't accelerate.
So, I would imagine that a nonprofit, which in the nonprofit world, it's usually like, I don't have enough time or money. That's like the standard line. But I would imagine that they would be pretty eager when you approach them or they're selected. How's that whole process work of finding the next nonprofit to work with? Yeah,
so we have, I think the flagship hackathons that we have, the ones that are labeled with Roman numerals like Global Hack 6 or 7, I think one of the things we learned from previous events is that we're bringing all these different people together, and you have organizations that are doing similar work in a similar space. So like, for example, in 2016, you had the focus on homelessness, right? You have different organizations who are focused on different target populations. They each have their own service that they offer. It could be housing, it could be utility assistance, it could be food or groceries, right? They all work in some way collaboratively, or at least that's the ideal, right? So trying to think about how can technology add value, not just to them as individuals, but more of like a systems change, and say like, how does organization A potentially interact or communicate with organization B? Like, are there software, are there tools that allow them to actually, move clients seamlessly or share information more seamlessly? I think those are the types of, it's rather than just like selecting one organization, we have this broader look and say like, what are some interesting things going on in like mental health, for instance? A lot of people are talking about that. It's very timely. Like, what does a systems level conversation look like? And then from there, break it down. Well, what organizations are doing work in that space? In what ways are they already utilizing technology to, potentially offer services or programs, things like that. So we do have an event that we just launched in February. I think it went very well, and something we'll probably do on an annual basis is take a look at, well, there are some problems that aren't system level problems. Like, why don't we take a look at an organization who says, hey, you know what, we just need an upgraded website, or we have an app and it sucks, and we want to be able to, like, there's one organization, Circus Harmony, who does like some really fantastic youth work here in St. Louis, and they needed it was an unsexy project, but like a very awesome organization around like timesheets. They needed a better way for like their part-time staff to be able to like record the time they had in the field, and it was taking them so much time to do this manually, right? Like, in a small organization, and I feel the pain too. We have a full-time staff of 4. Of like, if we can save 5 to 10 hours a week, like, that's huge. That's time, that's money. And so we thought, are there some like more bite-sized problems that we can take on and partner directly with organizations? And so they applied to we had a program. It's kind of like a grant, but it wasn't as, it was just a form they filled out to say, here's our organization, this is what we do, this is who we serve, and here's a specific tech problem that I would love tackled over the course of a hackathon. So we called it Code with a Cause. We had about 100 people attend in our first year, and outside of I think some things to tweak and make sure that we're matching, getting the right people in the room with the right skill sets to attack the projects that we have. I think that both the nonprofits and participants said, like, this is really cool. We'd love to be able to find ways to, and a lot of them have continued relationships after the hackathon too. Like, they want to be able to ensure that, like, the project that they built over the hackathon, it doesn't sit on a shelf. It's like, okay, well, this is how to use it. This is, if you have questions and want to modify it, or if it breaks, like, give me a call, shoot me a text.
So that's cool. Just in regards to how do you find those? Do they come to you? Do you go to them? Do you start with like that high level challenge and then how to address it, or like what's that look like?
I think it's just word of mouth. I think part of it is, for the large scale hackathons, it's, we kind of, it's a lot of coffees and lunches and just kind of like sitting there and listening, right? And like for us to just shut up and say, like, tell us, how does this work? Let me understand your world and your industry and figure out, like, well, what if this were, and try to really understand the problem. I think a lot of times when I would have some of those conversations before, even sitting out with different organizations, they'd be like, well, we would love an app or a website that does this. And they immediately go to the solution, what that looks like. And it's like, well, let me understand the problem, because if we don't understand the problem, there may be something that already exists, or let's not get ahead of ourselves and say, like, a solution is a brand new app, because an app you got to get people to download it. If it breaks, you got to hire someone to fix it. So it's like, well, maybe there's something that's existing on the shelf, technology that they can already use, something that they can customize. So I think it's just a lot of listening and kind of understanding. And again, that whole philosophy of build with, not for.
What's been your biggest challenges in your space?
Biggest challenge? I guess I'll kind of move over to like more of the education stuff that we have going on, because I think it's really exciting, and I think that a lot of parents and educators and districts are trying to think about, education has been, we've been using the same system for decades, right? Where like students go to school and they kind of learn. We've got basic, you've got math and science and reading and all of this, and yet the world of work is changing so rapidly, especially around technology, when you have companies like Amazon buying grocery stores, right? Yeah. And so we can deny that and say, like, oh, technology is not going to affect my industry. But even things like logistics, I mean, eventually we're going to have people that, trucks that drive themselves from city A to city B and warehouse and all this. So it's just not a matter of if, it's when these industries will be affected by technology. And so I think it's a matter of how do we get those students future ready, even if they're not going to become developers or coders, they need to at least understand the world of work and how it's changing, to say, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, whether you're a physician, okay, not everything's in healthcare, a banker, a journalist, in some way technology will have some impact, for better or for worse, on your career. So like we need to like at least expose you to that. And I think one of the biggest challenges within that is really around access. And I think that's where Global Hack can play a key role. I think ultimately schools will have to figure out how they embed that curriculum and that knowledge into their it's not 9 to 5, whatever school day is, 8 to 3, and figure out how their curriculum change, how their delivery changes in such a way to like accommodate the rapidly changing world of work, and especially when it involves technology. So I think especially for a lot of those students who are typically left behind, who don't have access to like a fancy laptop, who don't have access to even Wi-Fi at their school, like that's not just a problem that Global Hack will have, but I think for all these schools to figure out how do we get the resources and the infrastructure within our school and district to properly like get our kids ready for a world that is just like rapidly changing before their eyes. That's a big problem, and something that keeps us up at night, but we know there are other people that are focused on solving that problem too.
And how do you approach a problem like that, knowing that at the rate of acceleration of technology, that the things that children are learning today might not even take them 5 years out,
or that their jobs don't even exist?
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, so how do we address a future like that?
So I think that it's I think a really high level discussion is really around like what do you teach, right? So we have our approach is, while it's important, I think, for the kids to go through our programs to like leave with some demonstrable like coding skills. Like I think that's something that we want is more around like building capacity or interest, right? Having them be intellectually curious, to say like this idea of being a lifelong learner, and that learning doesn't stop when you graduate high school. It doesn't stop when you graduate college. It doesn't stop when you even get your first job, right? And so if we can start to like integrate that curiosity at such a young age, to say like, you're going to be learning your entire life. And so just getting people to be these kind of sponges that are going to soak up information and figure out how to change. I think making them kind of preparing them for that. So it's not just necessarily like a hard skill, like you need to learn this. It's like kind of the soft skills, right? The soft skills around like, how do you learn things quickly? How are you resourceful? There's so much that's available online now, even for kids as early as kindergarten to learn coding basics, right? Like how do we, and I think that there are things that, yes, we can try to wait for the school system to catch up with that. We know that the educational system is purposely slow. So right now you can find stuff on Kickstarter, right? You can get a Sphero robot, you can get flashcards. So I think parents are saying like, hey, if my school's not going to offer it, I'm going to go to the internet, I'm going to go crowdsource, and I'm going to like provide this opportunity for my student. So that they may also be a factor too, is that people just like go on their own and say like, I can provide these classes, like I'll do, like kind of provide it to my student directly if my district isn't going to get their act together, or if they just simply don't have the resources. We know sometimes it's not just a matter of like not wanting to move. It's like, we would love to be able to offer this, but they just don't have the money. They don't have the teachers. That's another challenge, is around professional development. I think a lot of districts are struggling even just to get math and science teachers like qualified. So like teaching coding on top of that, it's like, well, we've got to be able to teach them math. I mean, that's a basic thing that we need it for test scores and all of that sort of stuff for accreditation. Coding is a nice to have. It's not a got to have. And so we need it. That's another thing, the kind of policy environment that we're working in.
So what advice would you give to a parent that wants their child to be involved in learning those sorts of things, but they don't necessarily have access through their education system for it?
So I think there's a lot of things. I think that, the bigger ask would be like, hey, get involved on your school board and say like, is there a way to advocate to say, hey, we want these types of classes offered, right? That's going to ultimately be up to the district to figure out, what do we offer, what kind of curriculum. I think there are some things in the short term they can do, either by going to these online resources and these classes they can get, or even just after school programs. Like I know there's a lot of schools that we work with that maybe they don't offer like a full-fledged like AP computer science course in high school, or they don't offer AP computer science in middle school, but even if it's like a beginner class, to say like, hey, we'd really encourage you to like figure out, can you partner with an organization like Global Hack or somebody else that offers this after school programming? Send them to a summer camp. So I think there's some kind of short-term ways in which, parents can figure out how do we get them some of these opportunities. And it doesn't have to necessarily be coding, whether it's robotics. I think it's just some things that will make students intellectually curious and make it seem fun. Like, I want to learn. This is something that I can tinker and work with myself. Maker spaces, very hands-on. Those are types of things that I recommend for a parent, just to be like at stake and involved. And if enough parents come together and, start barking at the administration to say like, we need you to offer this, because otherwise our students are going to enter a world, in 5 or 10 years will be drastically different from the world they are in today. And what are we doing to prepare them?
Yeah. And I would say you have a sphere of involvement in things other than education, like you're talking about, but also nonprofit, startup, innovation, the entrepreneurship space.
Yep.
There's a lot of people you could speak to about advice, but what other advice do you have people in some of those other spaces that you feel like you are equipped to speak specifically to?
First and foremost, show up. I think they're just people who, especially in a city like St. Louis, so I'm a transplant. I moved here from Iowa, and I found that there's just so many opportunities, like so many tables that were open to me to say like, oh, you want to like get involved with that event? Like, sure, like here's a seat at the table. And I think that was really cool, of someone who kind of like wanted to dig in and roll up his sleeves and say like, okay, let's get to work here. There wasn't this whole like, oh, like you're not invited or you're not one of us. Like, it didn't matter that I wasn't from St. Louis. Like, I was almost encouraged to be like, oh, you're not from here. Like, okay, go for it, So I think just just to show up in spaces and to be present. And I think after that, it's really around, there's amount of grit and work involved in kind of seeing things happen, whether there be like a company that you're starting, whether it's a meetup, a community organization, and that kind of the idea around execution. You can have a great idea and say like, oh, this is something I want to start. I mean, look at this project. I mean, you guys have like, interviewed so many different people. You have a brand, you've got a great, tagline and all of that. Like, this is something, there's some consistency built in. And there's this guy that I read a lot of his blogs. He's called James Clear. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. Mm-mm. And so he talks a lot about like the science behind improvement, right? And it's not just this, I have to be motivated to work to do something. He's like, no, it's about getting up and going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, right? It's that compound effect you get from, you go to the gym and then suddenly you're more motivated to like eat better. It's like just, you kind of feel momentum. I know for certain weeks, like this week I'm super busy and I know that I'm eating out and I'm not eating great. And it's just like, it's because I'm busy. But if I were more disciplined, I would say like, no, I'm going to make my meal on Sunday. I'm going to go to the gym and all that. So I think it's just understanding that, there are a lot of different opportunities. And I think with social media, we have this whole kind of like, here's a flashy event here. Here's an opportunity there. There's something I want to do. But I think ultimately for some of these longer term projects, people will be rewarded by that discipline and that focus to say like, no, if I'm going to start a company, like I'm giving 100% to that. Maybe I have a little bit for family and some fun, but ultimately like I'm sticking to that. And when there's another opportunity, like I'm going to be the one that gets up early, that I'm going to be the one that stays at work late and just gets it done. And I think that level of grit and determination is something that I think that I see missing sometimes. Of just like entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, I'd really like to start this business. And it's like, okay, well, are you working on weekends? Are you getting up early? It's like, oh no, I think it would be fun. It's like, it can be fun, but let me tell you, it's a shit ton of work. And are you really ready for it? It's hard to tell founders that, I think, or potential founders that, and be like, are you really ready to be an entrepreneur? And kind of doing that gut check and say like, it's going to take some work. It's going to be fun, but know that there's going to be some times where you just like hate life and you've got to ask, significant other or whatever, like, hey, I need this weekend. I need to like just send out 100 emails to potential clients. I need to like, whatever it is. So that's the advice I would have. I don't know if it's worth anything, but I think that level of just discipline. And then, people go on to sign up for James Clear, his email. I find that he gives a lot of really relevant, especially as it revolves around like exercise or just like setting. I was reading today around like, I think a lot of people like, I want to get to the gym. And he's like, no, I have it on my calendar. And it's that simple thing to say like, it's not a matter of like, if I get around to it, it's just like 6 o'clock, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, James is going to the gym and he's going to do these reps or he's going to do this. And just that simple kind of just putting it on your calendar to say like, sometimes you don't show up to the gym, but ultimately it's not a matter of like, if I'm not tired, then I'll go. Or if I'm not busy, then I'll go. Because there's always something that will fill that gap.
There's always something,
Whether it's for the gym or for building a company.
You're kind of hitting on that principle of consistency, which you have in your calendar, and you might miss a day or two, but it's not what you do once or twice. It's what you do consistently over time that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Compound effect, yeah.
I love that. James Clear, we'll put that in the show notes for everyone to link up with that newsletter. Matt, man, this has been a pleasure just kind of catching up and hearing a little bit about what you're doing and where Global Hack is headed. What's the next big one?
It'll be in October 12th and 14th at Chaffetz Arena. So we're back there. We're really glad to have SLU serving as a host and title sponsor again. And it'll be focused around foreign-born populations, so immigrants, refugees. How do we kind of improve the experience for them, both in St. Louis but potentially abroad? We know that's a very relevant issue on a national scale, and there's some great organizations that are doing some amazing work here in St. Louis, and we partnered with them and have, to that process I mentioned before, I've really sat down and just listened and just, what are some things that we can do? What does the process look like when they come to St. Louis? I was fortunate enough, we had a staff gathering. We went to volunteer at the International Institute. They have a New American potluck And as someone who's like a big fan of food, I'm like, potluck, sign me up, whatever. But it was this really cool event where you have community volunteers who show up for lunch, and it's a very simple act of like breaking bread together, and people are, bringing pots of vegetarian chili, and, you have different ethnic foods, and just that simple act of like sitting down of someone who is, very new to St. Louis. They may not see people who look like them or act like them or speak their language. And for strangers to come out and say like, I'm willing to give up a couple hours of my day and not just, have a meal with you, but to like sit down and like, hey, welcome to St. Louis. Like, how cool is that? And it was just a really powerful type of event. And so like, I think there's that human element that sometimes we miss. We start talking about technology and this cool app and all these systems. It's like at the end of that system, ultimately is a person. And how do we be cognizant of that? And so this whole idea of like human-centered design, like how does someone kind of move through a process, and where might technology be inserted there to like make their life better? I think that's the value that we provide, or at least that's a small part that we can play.
So how can teams register for that Global Hack event?
They just go to our website, globalhack.org. We've made a couple changes this year. Ultimately, we're still targeting over 1,000, so we're gonna fill the arena with some great developers and innovators in that space. We're offering some different ticket levels, so if you just want to come to the event without any food, if you want to have a meal plan, we have a new VIP package that you can get, or you can get better food and get a cushion seat. We've got a hack pack that has like an eye mask, breath mints, deodorant, different things that you're going to need for 48 hours of hacking. So if people want more of that concierge level, service at a hackathon, they can get it. So if they just go to the website, globalhack.org, there's a link to register there, information about, how to get involved. If you want to volunteer, schedule for events, everything is on the website, globalhack.org.
Awesome. Where can people connect with you?
Online, they can do it on Twitter, just at Matt Menietti, trying to be more active on there, and then Instagram as well. Just, tweet about startups, nonprofits, Star Wars. You want to talk about, Last Jedi, my thoughts on that, feel free to hit me up on Twitter.
There you go.
And,
there you go.
Yeah, it's a good time. So that's where I'm at online.
Well, Matt, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you today.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Matt.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're in St. Louis, visit us on a Thursday night. You can find details at vincafstl.org. You can also connect with us on social at WeAreSlam or at Venture Cafe STL.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die.